everyone, my name's Nicole and I'm this year's Food Corps School Nutrition Service member with the New Jersey Department of Agriculture. Did you know that worms are excellent at recycling? Vermicomposting is all about feeding worms organic materials so they can produce worm castings which are good for the soil. Vermicomposting produces a rich organic soil amendment containing a diversity of plant nutrients and beneficial microorganisms. Worm composting is great because it keeps our organic waste from ending up in landfills and allows us to create resources like our compost and eventually the plants that will be growing. It also provides the plants that will be growing with valuable organic matter, nutrients, and a diversity of beneficial microorganisms. Let's play a worm-themed game of true or false. Worms can eat their full weight in food every day. What do you think? Is this true or false? If you answered false, you'd be correct. Worms can actually only eat half of their weight in food every day. Worms don't have lungs, so they actually breathe through their skin. If you answered true, you'd be correct. Worms have both male and female organs. If you answered true, you'd be correct. Worms have an average lifespan of 8 years. If you answered false, you'd be correct. Worms have an average lifespan of 2 years, but can actually live to be up to 8 years. Worms have no eyes, but can sense light and move away from it. If you answered true, you'd be correct. Worms can survive being cut in half. If you answered false, you'd be correct. Worms can regenerate their tail, but only if it's cut off close to the end. Worms have tiny hairs called setae that help them move. If you answered true, you'd be correct. Worms are cold-blooded, so they're the same temperature as their environment. If you answered true, you'd be correct. I hope you enjoyed that game. Now let's move on to making our very own worm compost bin. Let's gather our materials. We need a compost bin with holes for the worms to breathe, some newspaper, straw or hay to use as bedding, a spray bottle, garden soil, food scraps, and worms for composting. First, we're going to add straw or newspaper to the bin. This will serve as the worms' bedding. We're going to use the spray bottle to keep the straw or newspaper nice and moist, like a wrung-out sponge. Next, we'll add soil from the garden because it helps the worms' digestion. Then we'll add food scraps. This must be buried under the bedding of newspaper, straw, or hay in order to not attract pests. Lastly, we need to add our worms. To store your worm bin, we want to keep it inside, away from vents. A basement, closet, or laundry room is ideal. To maintain your worm bin, feed the worms leftover fruits and vegetables and other kitchen prep waste. You can partner with your school cafeteria and ask them to save you their food scraps. One tip to prevent overfeeding is to feed smaller amounts every 1 to 2 weeks. The worms can't have it too wet or too dry, because worms breathe through their skin and can actually drown. To harvest our compost, we want to use the dump and sort method to separate the undigested material from the finished material. We want to place our finished material into several small cone-like shapes, and then over time, the worms will flee from the light and migrate to the center of the cone. Then you can scoop off the top, which will not have the worms, and use it as compost in your garden. Let's reflect on what we learned today. Did you learn anything in this video that surprised you? How do decomposers play an important role in growing food? I hope you had a great time learning about vermicomposting today, and I'll see you next time. Bye!